would like to, so first things first, as you, I'm sure, have all seen, we released the call for proposals in April, actually in May 13th, and we don't want to repeat the information that is provided in the call for proposals. There are great details available in the call, both about the focus of the conversation of the proposals and as well as the guidelines on how to fill an NOI and proposal. So this presentation is going to focus on some key changes and a few highlights that we want you to keep in mind when you're preparing your NOIs and proposals. And also wanted to flag that there are, in fact, few changes as we have been trying to keep our innovation fund stable and predictable. So it will allow you to plan forward and to continue to develop strong proposals. But some of the changes that we have introduced are in response to the CFA conversation that took place earlier this winter. So quickly, the topics for our presentation today are the competition budget and objectives, a review of some of the changes and new features that we've introduced, an overview of the application process as well as the merit review process, an indication of the timeline, and we hope that this is an interactive session and that we are able to answer questions, as I said, during the presentation, as well as we built in quite a bit of time at the end of the presentation for any questions you might have. So we encourage you to continue to type them in, and from time to time, Sharon may flag an opportunity to stop, and one of the three of us will be able to answer your questions. So I'm sure you're all aware that in Budget 2018, the Government of Canada has proposed to establish permanent funding for the CFI. We have a new contribution agreement that is in place until 2026. And therefore, we have a new funding model that allows us to provide IF competitions at regular intervals. The regular intervals are about from 24 to 30 months. So with this 2020 Innovation Fund, we're launching the first IF competition under this new funding model, with the next competition slated with decisions in fiscal year 2022-2023. The budget for this competition is similar to the one that we had in 2017. It is $400 million for capital, as well as the associated $120 million for the infrastructure operating funds. The purpose of the Innovation Fund, as in past years, is to help Canada remain at the forefront of exploration and knowledge generation while making meaningful contributions and generating benefits to Canada and Canadians. The objectives of this competition, again, very much in keeping with the IF competitions of 2017 and 2015, are to enable global leadership by supporting world-class research or technology development. I will use research to encompass both research and technology development, so I don't repeat it every time. It's to enhance and optimize the capacity of institutions and research communities to conduct the proposed research, and as is embedded in all of the CFI funds, to lead to social, health, environmental, or economic benefits for Canadians. So for this info session, as I mentioned at the beginning, we just want to focus on main changes that took place between the 2017 Innovation Fund and the 2021 that we are currently in. One of the things that we did is broadened certain infrastructure eligibilities. So this is not, in fact, a change to the competition, but these eligibilities will first apply to the Innovation Fund, and therefore we are introducing them in the context of the Innovation Fund competition. We have broadened two types of eligibilities. The first one is for extended warranties and service contracts, not only for the infrastructure that is being requested, but also for existing infrastructure. And this is to enable you to take advantage of equipment that is still very useful and important or pivotal for your research program. And if you can extend its useful life by getting extended warranties or service contracts rather than purchasing new infrastructure, we are enabling the community to do that. We've had a couple of questions about how will we apply this broadened eligibility, so we want to clarify that it applies to both CFI funded and non-CFI funded infrastructure. For the non-CFI funded infrastructure, it must meet the same eligibility guidelines for all CFI infrastructure projects, and that includes the infrastructure use, location, and control. In the proposals, if you are asking for extended warranties or service contracts, you will need to do the following. You will need to demonstrate that the existing equipment is necessary and appropriate for the proposed research. You will need to demonstrate that the purchase of these warranties is the optimal option for the proposed programs. We were asked also about the duration. How long could these warranties last? Well, they should be commensurate with the time that the equipment is going to be used for the proposed research activities, and by the same token, it should not exceed the useful life of the equipment. If it's funded, it is part of the itemized list, and therefore the cost of the embedded in the total cost of the project, and will generate IOF, which in itself will allow you to extend the sustainability of the project. So using both the warranties as well some of the IOF funding. The other item that we changed, or not changed, we broadened the eligibility for is that for collaborative research spaces. And what we mean by collaborative space and why did we do this? It's to enable research collaborations and the space has to be purpose-built and essential for the proposed research. We also, in order to be considered as eligible, it must be primarily used for research activities. And so some of the examples of what would be an eligible collaborative research space is, for example, to hold focus groups, depending on the research that you conduct. What might be a non-eligible cost, and we've been asked by several institutions, what about a cafeteria or a kitchen or a lounge? Since these are not built specifically for research, those will not be considered as eligible spaces. These broadened eligibilities are going to be phased in 2019 and will apply to all CFI funds. And we are planning to release a short update to the policy and program guide. We're calling it the PPG patch that will be available in fall 2019. And this will the patch will incorporate the changes to eligibility. The next change that we made, and this one is absolutely in keeping, is a change to the Innovation Fund competition, is that to team. And we've opted to strengthen the concept of a research team. And we did that in several ways. First is we added an option to include up to 2 team leaders instead of a single one project leader. So I want to emphasize that this is an option, it's not a must, and it will enable you to recognize other leaders within a team when you're and potentially to form a more inclusive research team. We've had some questions about who can be or who should be the 1 or 2 team leaders. So that is completely up to the research team, and as appropriate, you should identify the roles of these team leaders, but there are no specific guidelines. It's whatever makes sense to the composition of your team, whether you should have 1 or 2 and who these team leaders should be. We view the 2 team leaders as being equal. They have equivalent roles. However, because of the way our online system is developed, only one person can submit or start developing a project and submit it to the institution. And this person we have indicated will be the administrative leader. And the administrative leader has the permissions and the access to start the NOI, to populate it, and to submit it to the institution. The administrative leader will also have access to the post-award documents in CAMS, but I need to specify this is depending on the access that is given project leaders by the individual institutions. The Team leader who's not the administrative leader still has read and write access to both the notices of intent as well as the proposals. However, as just said, they will not be able to submit the project, submit the NOIs or the proposals to the administrative institution. We further decided, since we are talking about a team, we renamed principal users as team members. And we also added an emphasis on the team diversity by in the criterion standard. And we added a definition of what we mean by diverse team and ask you to compose a team that includes people who are at different stages of their career with different backgrounds and from underrepresented groups as appropriate for the proposed project. Again, there are no quotas, there are no set expectations. We recognize that a team can have maximum 10 people, so the diversity, it would not make sense to have set proportions. What we do is for you to demonstrate and to consider is how can you enrich the team by looking at including diverse members. And from the CFI perspective, we consider that not just underrepresented groups, but also people at different stages of their career or from different disciplines. But I'm going to reemphasize that this is as relevant to the project that is being proposed. Okay, so that takes us to our application process. As in the past, it's a two-stage application process that includes the notice of intent as well as the proposal. Both of these are detailed, the steps in how to complete a notice of intent to apply and a proposal are detailed in the call for proposals. In the second part, we decided to have both documents in one, so you don't have to use multiple reference documents when you're completing your proposals. We bring to your attention that the NOI is a requirement. If you do not submit an NOI in an online system in CAMS, you will not be able to submit a proposal. And both of these are submitted through the CFI award management system or CAMS. We would also bring to your attention that all the technical instructions on how to use CAMS are available in one of two documents. Both are called Getting Started with CAMS documents. There's one for researchers and one for research administration staff. Many of the sections for the NOI as well as the proposal are free-form attachments. They're PDF uploads. So the legibility of the attachments is very important. So please comply with the formatting instructions as per the guidelines. It's very important that the experts and various committee members are able to read the content without straining their eyes, especially if you think that many of them have to read several proposals, and it does take its toll. When we receive the NOI and the proposals, we do what we call an administrative review. We are not assessing the content, but what we're doing is we make sure that all the infrastructure that is being requested is eligible. We make sure that the NOI or proposal are legible and complete. It's very seldom that we return the NOI or proposal to the institutions. However, if there are issues, we may return it to you for changes. And the reason that we're mentioning this is because we will expect a very quick turnaround time, and usually within 1 or at most 2 days. So it's also important to remember the administrative team leader must first submit the NOI or proposal to the institution. It's only the institution that is able to submit NOIs or proposals to the CFI. So therefore, there is some lag time between the time the researcher submits the NOI or proposal to the institution, so internal deadlines should be adjusted accordingly. Each institution has an upper limit of the total CFI funding that they may request, and this is called the institutional envelope. There's an appendix 1 in the call that lists all the institutional envelopes for all the CFI eligible institutions. And you must adhere to this envelope. Again, this is for the CFI amount, not for the total project costs, except with the case of one exception. Any institution that opts to submit only one proposal, and one proposal will mean either as the administrative institution or a collaborative one, may be exempt from adhering to its envelope. Other than this exemption, an institutional envelope applies to all projects that are submitted by an institution, and that includes both as the administrative institution and the collaborative one. So you have to be mindful of how you are sharing this envelope among your projects and among those that you're collaborating in. For the CFI, a collaborating institution is one that receives part of the infrastructure and or uses part of its institutional envelope for the project. So in the past, we used to have to keep careful tabs on your envelope. We have added a feature in CAMS, which allows you to manage your envelope by running reports. You can do them in as often as you need. That will allow you to keep track of the commitments you've made from your envelope and to keep up to date on the envelope calculations. And this, I know, came as very good news to a lot of institutions, perhaps to all institutions, that the envelope calculation forms that used to be a requirement for the submission of a project are no longer required. So if you can use the report, so can we. And we will have the accurate scenario of how much of your envelope was committed. You can exceed your institutional envelope by up to 10% at the time of the NOI submission. However, you must comply with the envelope. You cannot exceed it, not even by $1, when you submit the proposal or by the proposal deadline. So we will look at the two parts of the submission process, at the NOIs and the proposals. The NOI form is available right now online. So if you want to access it, if you want to start completing your NOI at the end of this webinar, there's nothing stopping you. And the NOI form, I want to emphasize, is very similar to the one that we have used in past competitions. There are very few, if any, surprises. And these will assist. So the NOIs, the reason that we ask for notice of intent is for a couple of reasons. First of all, it helps us identify the requirements for the review process. It will help us identify what is the equipment that is being requested, what kind of disciplines will be involved, and it allows us to start the recruitment process for the project that we receive. It also allows us to identify any potential eligibility issues, especially as associated with the infrastructure. So we may get back to you or may decide to flag them for post-award considerations. NOIs are not subject to merit review. They are exclusively to help us understand and develop our plan for the expert review process, or for the entire merit review process. The NOI used to have 5 sections. It now has 6. There's one new section, the project summary. And it is important here to provide an accurate list of the team members, because if we have to exclude certain people from our recruitment, we need to know who's on your team, which institutions they're affiliated with, so we can avoid all conflicts of interest. As for the team members, I should tell you or remind you that when you're composing your team, other than the administrative team leader, everybody else has to accept to participate. So a second team leader will have to accept, as well as the team members. And they will do so in CAMS. If they have not accepted participation in CAMS, you will not be able to submit your NOI. The project description is a free-form PDF document. It's a 4-page attachment, and it's meant to give a brief description of the major pieces of infrastructure, as well as an overview of the research activities and the anticipated research outcomes. Again, this is important information to give us guidance on the expertise that will be required to review your project. We also ask it that you provide us at least 6 reviewer suggestions. You can provide more, but you need at least 6, and who are not in conflict of interest. In 2017, we came across quite a few situations where you had identified or suggested reviewers, you meaning the entire community, who had, of course, excellent expertise, but were in conflict of interest. So rather than waste their time by coming back to us and letting us know that, oh, but in fact, I have collaborated with so and so, please be very mindful and careful that you do not suggest individuals who might be in conflict. Also, ask you to think about suggesting a diversity of reviewers, so including those who are at different stages of their career, again, diverse backgrounds or underrepresented groups, again, in our bid to diversify not just your teams, but also our expert committees, and bring diverse opinions and perspectives to the review process. Once we have all the NOIs, after the NOI deadline, we're going to share the information, meaning the team leaders, the project summary, and the project and the institutions on our website. This is in order to encourage you to explore the NOIs that have been submitted and see if there are similar proposals that might lead to potential collaborations on joint initiatives. 2 more things that we want to mention about notices of intent. Notices of intent must also indicate if any advanced research computing infrastructure is being requested and whether the infrastructure is going to be sited at a national or international facility. As in past competitions, advanced research computing requests are eligible, and we continue to maintain and believe that investments in the ERC or advanced research computing infrastructure can be maximized by being shared. And therefore, if you're planning to submit a request for advanced research computing in excess of $100,000, we would expect that it normally be housed, managed, and operated by Compute Canada. We therefore encourage you to consult with Compute Canada using the process that is posted on our website, on the Compute Canada website, early in the process to determine if that is the appropriate path for the infrastructure that you may wish to request. Advanced research computing projects that are national in scope for collective and shared advanced research computing will not be accepted in this competition, and these will reside under the auspices of the new National Digital Research Infrastructure Strategy that was announced by ICED in this past April. If you have any questions about advanced research computing, we strongly recommend that you get in touch with your senior program officer as soon as possible so we can deem whether the request would be eligible or perhaps more suitable for the digital research infrastructure. We have a dedicated small group of colleagues who are very familiar with Compute Canada and the DRI, and they are reviewing these early questions or the pre-NOI requests and will be able to guide you about eligibility. And last but not least, what you should note in your NOI is if your infrastructure is going to be sited at or a national or international research facility, we expect that you consult with the host facility and comply by their established planning and project approval processes. And approval should be sought before you submit an NOI. In fact, it must be obtained, not just should be thought before you submit an NOI. Are there any questions at this point or that we identified about the submission process? Okay. All right. So we'll give my voices a short break, and I'll give you a short couple of seconds or maybe even a full minute to submit a question or two about what we had just covered. So I'm going to start with actually about the advanced research computing question about should we follow recommendations from um, our advanced ARC department. I think that's probably the place to start. However, it does not replace undertaking discussions with Compute Canada, and as well as if this is as I said, a large, perhaps national in scope undertaking, I would definitely encourage you to get in touch with your senior programs officer.
So we have a question from Miriam. Should all the requested instruments in the total proposal be used as common facility, or can they be used for collaborative projects, but mainly used by one of the teams that would be relevant to the expertise of one group?
So I guess we're trying to deconstruct the question. So maybe we'll take a stab at it. So if you're asking if all the instruments need to be in a common facility, they can be in a common facility. They definitely can be used for collaborative projects. The thing to keep in mind is when you're submitting a proposal is to have a focal point, because the research and or technology development are one of the key criteria for review. So you want to have a very strong, innovative, world-class project or projects that hold together that is being requested. So if there's if you're thinking that there may be other teams or other colleagues who may take advantage of instruments that are being requested for a particular project, that is fine, as long as those who are in the research team that are putting in the proposal have first access and sufficient access. So as long as you can demonstrate that, then of course, if there's additional capacity in the instrumentation, and it can be used not just by other colleagues, but perhaps by other partners from other sectors like industry.
So Nancy just wants us to confirm that the institutional liaison in the research office at the institution is the person who contacts the senior programs officer at CFI, and that's correct.
So there's a question about the envelope size of small institutions. I would just bring to your attention, go back to the Appendix 1 in the call for proposals. Some of the smaller institutions have their own envelope, others that may not have a large share of the Tri-Council funding have $1.75 million as their envelope. That is the minimum envelope.
And then we have a question from Marcus about the page limit for the project description, which is the PDF attachment. It's
for the NOI,
for the NOI, it's 4 pages, which
yes.
includes any figures or any other information that you think would be important in that project description.
And for everybody's information, all the page limits and character limits, etc., are outlined in part 2 of the call for proposals, and they will also be outlined when you're in CAMS completing the different pieces of the proposals and the notices of intent.
Okay, so Nancy, I will speak about EDI very, very shortly as we're going to the proposal. In CAMS and the forms, there are questions about leasing space. Leasing space is not an eligible cost for the CFI. Okay, so that takes us, you have submitted your NOI, and now you start working on the proposal. Or we wanted to mention that if you're submitting your NOI this summer, you may not have the proposal form may not appear immediately. It will be there if you submit closer to the deadline, but it's not an automatic thing. So don't get worried if you submit your NOI sometime in July or August if the proposal form does not become available right away. But it will be available very shortly. So some of the basic information from the NOI is already populated in the project, and that includes the team leader or team leaders and the administrative institution. So if there are any changes, if you decide to change some of the team composition or the administrative institution, we ask you that you please contact us as soon as possible, because that could introduce some conflicts of interest in our expo committees. So please, if there are any changes, let us know as soon as possible, as well as if you are planning to not submit a project for which you submitted an NOI, we would greatly appreciate it if you'd inform us as soon as possible. The proposal form, just as in past years, has 3 modules: the project module, the finance module, and the suggested reviewers. The suggested reviewers will be, again, pre-populated from the NOI. You can make some changes, you can add names, but that's what will appear in the proposal. So the form is very similar. In fact, we've made practically no changes, so none of this should come as a surprise to you. We want you to remember about collaborating institutions, that you identify them and have them accept to participate as soon as possible, and also to identify them in the proposal before you start completing the finance module. The reason for that is if you have infrastructure that is going to be cited at your collaborating institutions, you will need to identify your collaborators before starting to complete the finance module. There's also a table for operating and maintenance, which will list, in which you will list the cost and revenues and different sources for operating and maintaining the infrastructure once it becomes operational. Multi-institutional projects with 3 or more collaborating institutions may request an additional or up to 5% of the CFI amount that they're requesting for administrative costs associated with the management and governance of these projects. You will have to put that amount that is being requested, again, it's up to 5%, it doesn't have to be 5%, in as additional CFI in this O&M table. We've had quite a few questions about the 5%, and the way we don't have detailed instructions because different projects have different composition and administrative needs. The reason that we introduced this additional amount of up to 5% is to enable collaborations and to make them a little easier, and also in recognition that if you're working across several institutions, sometimes across several provinces, that there's an additional layer of oversight and management, as well as governance, depending on the side of the project. So the additional amount that is being requested has to be in keeping with what are the additional costs that are being incurred when you run a large multi-institutional project. So this contribution or this request has to be justified as part of the proposal and is part of the merit review adjudication system, adjudication process. We found in 2017, in some cases, the amount was requested in the table, but there was absolutely no explanation as to why it's being requested. So it doesn't mean that we don't understand that you need it, but if you don't give us a good rationale for why this should be made available, we are not able to have the reviewers guide the CFI on whether this is an acceptable cost or not.
So the question from Karash, Sandra, is for admin costs, is the 5% on top of the ask, or can it be up to 5% within the ask?
So this is an additional, this is in addition to the CFI amount that is being requested, this is 5% on top of that.
The next question as well from Daniel is, can you give some examples of what eligible costs might look like?
Yes, I can give some examples, but again, this doesn't mean that it is one answer is right for all. So, for example, if you need a project manager who's in charge of communicating with 5 sites across Canada, who tables the weekly meetings with half a dozen different project leaders, then that would be an acceptable cost. If you have a board and your board members need to travel once a year for an in-person meeting, then that might be an eligible cost.
And Nancy has a question, would this 5% still be within the institutional envelope?
Nope, this is above and beyond. This is additional funds that are not part of the institutional envelope. Okay. So the key or the pivotal piece for your proposal is how you address the competition objectives and assessment criteria. This is a PDF document that you will upload into CAMS, and this is where the key information will reside. We want to remind you that there are two page limits depending on the amount being requested. For proposals requesting less than $2 million, you have a maximum 30 pages. And for proposals requesting above $2 million, you have up to 35 pages. There's a little quirk with our CAMS validation process, and you will not get an error message until pretty much the very end when you try to submit the proposal to the CFI and you have less than $2 million and you have perhaps 31 pages. That's when you will get the error message. So we strongly recommend that you be very mindful of the page limits, and so you're not presented at the last minute with the challenge of having to remove pages from your proposal. Other than that, the attachment allows you maximum flexibility in how you address the information. You can include figures, you can include diagrams, whatever is appropriate. We ask you that you address each assessment criterion in the order that they appear and to begin each criterion on a new page. I know this sounds a touch bureaucratic, but I can tell you from our experience that this makes a big difference to the ease of our committee members to review, to read, and to discuss the information. Again, we ask that you pay close attention to the guidelines on formatting, spacing, and font use as outlined in the guidelines portion of the call for proposals. But other than that, we say tell your own story, meaning you decide how much information you need to have or wish to have for each objective and criterion. Since this is the core of the proposal, make sure that you provide sufficient information to enable our reviewers to evaluate the proposal, not just based on the assessment criteria, but also on the 3 objectives, because different committees will be reviewing different components of the proposal. We have, as you know, a structured merit review process, and it's structured around the assessment criteria, which is each criterion having a standard which must be met. So reviewers have to identify strengths and weaknesses in each criterion and also rate how well the proposal compares to the standard for each of the criteria. Under each criterion, the applicants should also address the given set of instructions, and this will help you to demonstrate how your project meets the given criterion standard. Yes, the question is, should the references be within this 30 or 35 page limit? And the answer is yes. I don't want to read to you all the objectives and criteria. Again, they're very much in keeping with those that we used in past years, and they're elaborated on in the call for proposals. We slightly changed the alignment of the criteria and objectives, based on feedback that we've received from our expert committees and MACs. But other than that, things remain the same. The first objective, enabling global leadership, is predicated on research or technology development and the team. For research or technology development, we're looking, as always, for innovative, feasible, and internationally competitive projects. For the team, we're looking for a diverse team, but again, the crux is, does the team have the breadth of expertise to conduct the program, the proposed program? We introduced a third instruction, which reads as follows. Thus, you to describe the EDI principles you considered in composing the research team to include people who have the necessary expertise, who are at different stages of their career, and who are from underrepresented groups as appropriate for the proposed project. So there was already question about what are you going to do about it and what does it mean? This instruction was added for a couple of reasons. It was added because we wanted researchers, we wanted teams, and the CFI itself to become more inclusive, to increase awareness of the importance of diversity and the value of diversity in research excellence. We asked you to provide us with a short description of the considerations that you undertook, you being the team and or the institution, in order to inform the reviewers what considerations were taken, as well as informing the CFI. So this is the first time we're introducing this EDI-inspired instruction, and this is an opportunity for us, for all of us, to identify challenges, to identify things that work well, and to learn from this process. We have said, and this is what we will do, we're not going to ask the committees to assess this particular instruction. This is for information. So they're not going to give you a rating that is based on the gender balance, for example. However, we're going to open the door and allow the committees, whether it's the expert committees or the MAC, to provide feedback in order to inform the CFI, as well as perhaps inform the institutions on how to improve on what they're doing, or perhaps be lauded for the considerations that they took and for the diversity already included in the proposal. So it's partly learning, partly awareness, but this is our starting point. The second objective is to enhance and optimize the capacity of institutions and research communities. This is to recognize that it's not just institutions that are involved, but also you have partners, you have collaborators, it's a broad research community. And how the infrastructure will help you to build this capacity. And the second objective is associated with 3 assessment criteria with the research capacity. Does the institution and their partners, again, partners is not restricted to collaborating institutions. You can have partners perhaps in industry, demonstrate what is currently available in terms of research capacity. Of course, this is an infrastructure project. You're requesting infrastructure, so you'll need to demonstrate that it is necessary and appropriate for the proposed programs. And as importantly, for the sustainability, will it be optimally used and operated over its useful life? The third objective and 6th assessment criterion are about benefits. Will the team and partners have a well-defined plan to transfer the results? We want to remind you, though we recognize this is aspirational in part, what do you have in place in terms of how you will be using the results to generate impact? So do you have a plan? Do you have partners? Do you have experience doing this? So rather than having broad, high-level statements about curing cancer in 30 years, it's the knowledge transfer, knowledge mobilization, depending on the context of your project, that are important here. and how these results are likely to lead to social, health, environmental, and/or economic benefits for Canadians.
So I think we're just switching speakers now, but if there are any questions about the project module or the assessment criteria, now would be a good time if you want to wait maybe a minute and see if any questions come in. Otherwise, we'll get on with the finance module.
There's a question about using the EDI slide that was used at CARA. Can it be shared? Absolutely, it can be shared. And presumably Kara will post all the presentations very shortly.
It doesn't look like we have any other questions being typed right now, so I'll move on to the finance module of the proposal. So the finance module hasn't changed from the last competition or any other CFI competitions. So there are 5 sections: the cost of individual items, an attachment section for construction or renovation plans, a section to outline the contributions from eligible partners, the infrastructure utilization, and an overview summary of the information that's been provided. One note we'd like to make just about the construction and renovation plans attachment is we'd ask you to provide a breakdown of the overall construction costs that include the direct costs, soft costs, and please outline if there's any contingency included in this budget. The CFI has a maximum of 10% contingency on any construction costs. This section should also include a timeline of key dates for the construction and any floor plans that are available. We'd ask that you don't include any extra information in this attachment. Otherwise, we'll need to return it for it to be removed. Oh, yeah. So now we'll move on to the tools and resources that we have available. So starting with the tools that are available in CAMS, one new feature that we just announced in April was the liaison contact information list. So now by going through CAMS under the section that is the institutional agreement and access privileges section, liaisons can opt in to be part of this list, where they will have access to all the other liaisons who have provided their contact information. This list is only available to those who agree to share their own information. So we're really encouraging liaisons to agree to this so that you can get in touch with any of your counterparts at other institutions. The next component in CAMS that is newly available is the automatic CAMS notification for collaborating institutions. So anytime a team leader adds an institution as collaborating on a project, the institution that has been added will receive a notification and will need to accept the invitation and agree to share part of their envelope. If an institution doesn't plan to share part of their envelope but still will be collaborating on the project, they'll just need to indicate a $0 contribution. The last tool in CAMS, which Sandra spoke about a little bit earlier, are some reports that we've updated in the report repository, where institutions can keep track of both the researchers at their institution who are taking part in different IF projects. And also there's a report where you can keep track of your envelope use for all the projects that you're either the administrative institution on or the collaborating institution on. Some other resources that are available when you're developing your proposals from our website under the IF web page. Under documents and resources, we have some information about strengths and weakness analysis that was done about the reports submitted or written for the 2017 IF competition. So these were also presented at regional CARA meetings in 2018, but we have a summary of all of the strengths and weaknesses that were identified there. Also on our website, we have a list of all the eligible institutions that are eligible to CFI, and all CFI eligible institutions can apply to the Innovation Fund. So if you're looking for collaborators, that's a place to start to see who would be eligible. And the last resource that we have here is under the CARE resource library. We have in English only the best practices for preparing and managing multi-institutional projects. So that's a document that you might want to reference if you're planning to collaborate with other institutions. So to better understand the CFI's investments and the landscape and needs of the community, we've introduced two questions which are similar to the questions that were introduced in 2018 for JELF projects. So these have been updated slightly now for the IF. So these questions will come up for the institution to respond to. So the first question is about whether this proposal will enhance research capacity where the CFI has already invested in at this institution. And the second question is related to whether this infrastructure will be going towards a core facility or an MSI fund, or if it will not go towards either of those facilities. So recently the CFI put together an external advisory panel comprised of members across the country who manage, oversee, and work in core facilities. And this panel has established the following definition of a core facility. So this is what that question is referring to. This is the definition that we'll be using for core facilities for CFI infrastructure. If you want to take a deeper look into this, I would suggest you download the slides and read through the definition. We will move on now to the submission process. So as Sandra mentioned earlier, the whole submission process for both the NOIs and proposals is done electronically through the CFI's online award management system. The last sort of vestiges of the paper copies are being removed for this competition. Those were the signed cover letters and the list of all the projects being submitted by the institution or that they were collaborating on. You no longer need to submit those in any form. We have all that information in CAMS now. Moving on to the merit review process. So as in the past, the assessment of each proposal will include 3 stages. The first stage is the expert review process. This is where a small group of similar or related proposals are reviewed by experts in the field of research. The expert review committee will assess the strengths and weaknesses of the proposals based on the 6 assessment criteria. As in the past, we may hold face-to-face meetings. These will be for projects that we deem particularly large and complex. The dollar amount will not be the only determining factor for face-to-face meetings. So after the NOIs are submitted, the CFI will identify projects that will likely require a face-to-face meeting. And then following the submission of the full proposal, we'll confirm with the institution any proposals that will in fact need a face-to-face meeting as part of the expert review committee. Following the expert reviews, the proposals will be evaluated by multidisciplinary assessment committees. The MACs will review proposals grouped with others based on the size and complexity of the projects. As in the 2017 competition, we will have dedicated MACs to review proposals from small institutions. Each MAC will review approximately 30 proposals from diverse disciplines, and the MACs will identify proposals that best meet the standard of excellence for the competition. They will base this on the ones that best meet the competition objectives, and the MACs will be in charge of establishing the amount that should be awarded for proposals that are recommended for funding. To assist in the next stage of review, each MAC will identify up to 2 proposals that are of exceptional merit. So the next and final stage of review is the Special Multidisciplinary Assessment Committee. So this committee does not read the entire proposal. They only read the project summary that is part of the proposal, and they also receive the MAC reports. So the SMAC is charged with ensuring consistency among the MACs and recommending to the CFI's board of directors the proposals that most effectively support the CFI's mandate. So the SMAC will make their recommendations to the CFI board, which meets in November 2020, where then they will have the final approval of the proposals that are to be funded. A note here just about the CFI's collaboration with provinces. We encourage institutions to work with their provincial and territorial funding agency or authorities early on in the process. We recommend that you get in touch to find out what their process will be for the Innovation Fund. As in the past, we will coordinate the review process with provinces as feasible. And we will share the necessary documentation with the provincial and territorial governments. Moving now on to the competition timeline. So as you all know, the call for proposals was released exactly 1 month ago. The notices of intent are due September 16th, 2019, with then full proposals due in early 2020, January 20th. We will be holding expert review committee meetings in between March and June 2020. And then the MAC and SMAC committees will meet in September and October 2020. And as I said earlier, the CFI's board will meet in November 2020. So that covers all the information that we have to present. We'll now open the floor. If there are any questions, we'd ask you to submit them written. I think there are already some that have started. From Iris, can the proposal include infrastructure for 2 different but related projects? And can proposals be partially funded in such cases?
So Iris, thank you for that question. The requested infrastructure must obviously be related to the proposal being the proposed project. So if you're referring to multiple projects requiring similar infrastructure, you can definitely include the infrastructure in both proposals, knowing that if both are awarded, then we would have to make some decrease the CFI award based on that. We would ask in those situations that you reference both projects so that we're aware of these and we can advise the reviewers at the multiple processes or throughout the process, appropriately in those situations. And of course, for all of the infrastructure requested, you'll have to justify it in relation to the proposal that you're putting forward. So if I haven't answered that in the way you intended, please ask, send another question through to us.
And this just reminded me, actually, Iris had sent an email with another question about whether applicants can apply or put in multiple proposals at the same time. So we don't have any restrictions on whether researchers are team members or team leaders on multiple projects. So if there are researchers who are very involved in multiple projects, they're more than able to submit multiple proposals.
Right. And another note, though, on that is that that will still count towards having it in 2 different proposals, will still count towards your institutional envelope as well. So keep that in mind. There's another question from Miriam. I hope I'm saying that correctly. If the proposal is asking for a face-to-face assessment meeting, should all the members, co-applicants of the proposal attend the meeting? So just to be clear, the proposal itself won't dictate, like you won't ask for this in a proposal for a face-to-face meeting. This is an assessment that we will do at the CFI's end, but should we deem it necessary, then normally we would have up to 5 members participate in the face-to-face meeting with the CFI and with the expert committee.
And these members, just to add, are part of the team. Usually team leader, perhaps both team leaders, but there's also the expectation that a senior administrators, such as the VP research from the administrative institution, also represent the institution at these meetings.
And last question.
Yes. So, okay. So there was a question about, have all provinces bought into the competition? Specifically, has Ontario agreed? So I can tell you we've been asked that. This is the third time, and so during our CFI conversation process earlier in the year, our senior management representatives have met with all the provinces. Part of the discussion was about the 2020 Innovation Fund, and all of the provinces have expressed enthusiasm and interest. However, and this never happens, there isn't a financial commitment in advance of an innovation fund, so it's not an expectation that provinces would offer anything other than interest and enthusiasm at this stage. And so, yes, Ontario was, as all other provinces, uh, looking forward to take part in this competition. However, and again, like with all provinces, the budget is dependent on the government in place and the timing. So I don't believe that there are many of the provinces who would be able to confirm right now at this stage whether they will be able to match. So we're operating on the premise that, as in our past 20-year history, the provinces will be engaged. They do want to see their universities, their colleges, their research institutions excel, and they will do their best to match um, or provide funding for successful projects. But again, that being said, that is a provincial decision, provincial determination of the CFIs.
We had another question that was submitted ahead of the webinar, actually, that was related to the infrastructure eligibility date. So in our call for proposals, we had indicated that any infrastructure acquired on or after June 1st, 2017, that would be the eligibility date, and that's the correct date. And so this would apply to any expenditures incurred when goods are received or services have been rendered on or after that date.
I see a couple more questions coming in, so we'll just wait until they do.
So that date is June 1st, 2017. So any infrastructure after or on June 1st, 2017 could be eligible for the Innovation Fund. So we have a question from Karash. If a province fails to provide matching funds, will it be up to the institution to find the additional 40%? Yes, it's up to the institution to find the matching funds for CFI awards. So yes, if the province decides not to match the CFI contribution, then the institution would need to find the remaining funds from a different source.
So Marcus is just confirming that the June 1st, 2017 deadline, if you will, for eligible infrastructure, is that the date for any requests for extended warranties on existing equipment? And so, yes, it's the equipment itself doesn't have to have been purchased after that date, but the extended warranties and service contracts must be purchased after that date. So we see some more typing, so we'll just sorry for the dead silence for a bit while we wait. I know it takes a little bit longer to type, so thank you for that. Tony has asked, what dates can you update your CV until you submit the proposal to the institution for submission to the CFI. So once the researcher submits it, if you do need to, prior to submission to the CFI, however, you contact the Research Services Office and have them return it to you for revisions.
So we'll have a 2 or 3 more minutes for questions. If anyone needs to leave, please feel free. If you have any questions after the fact, you can send us an email to our Innovation Fund email address. We have a question from Kathy. Once researchers accept to participate, do any changes they make to their CV automatically update? So any changes to the CV will continue to be included up until the proposal is submitted to the institution. So we have a question from Michelle. How does previously successful applications impact eligibility on a new application? What if it's in the same discipline but with a different outcome? So other than we'd ask you to answer the question about previous CFI funding in this area, which is just for statistical purposes. Other than that, there's no impact on submitting a new proposal in the same research area that you have received CFI funding in the past. So that's perfectly fine.
So the question is, do new faculty, do they need to hold an answer discovery grant at the same time as a CFIF application? That is not a requirement per se. However, what is important is to demonstrate that since these are infrastructure awards, that there is the funding to conduct the research because the CFI does not cover research activities. So whether it's a discovery grant or other sources of funding, it is important to demonstrate that a team has the means to carry out the research and perhaps even have some funding for the operating and maintenance of the infrastructure.
It doesn't look like there are any more questions coming in. So again, if you have any questions later on, please send us an email or contact your senior programs officer. I think we are ready to wrap up. So we'd like to thank you all for having participated today. And we wish you all good luck submitting your NOIs and proposals for the 2020 Innovation Fund.